Oh, thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And could I also join in the tributes to my honourable friend, the member for Caerphilly, who, in my opinion, has announced his retirement at far too young an age. There's plenty of life left in him yet. But I do wish him well, and his partner Jane well, when eventually, in some considerable period of time, maybe in a couple of years' time, he actually stands down from the House. And Madam Deputy Speaker, may I also extend that to yourself, with both you and the Honourable Member for Caerphilly announcing your intention to leave the House at the next election. We really will be poorer on these benches in the future. I hope that my honourable friend for Caerphilly isn't leaving because in one of the last Welsh Affairs debate I claimed the title of Tad y Tŷ, the Welsh father of the House, as the longest serving Welsh Member of Parliament, having sneaked in before everybody else back in 2001 and taking my oath first of all the Welsh intake at that time. And I know that was very dispiriting for all the other Welsh members to suddenly realise that their hopes of ever being Tad y Tŷ were threatened by my claim of that title. But we meet to celebrate the patron saint of Wales and St David's Day, and to discuss Welsh affairs as we usually do each March. As I've said before, it is my view that this should be a permanent fixture and not something that we have to go with a begging bowl to the backbench committee to ask for this debate each year. But we meet at a time, as other honourable members have said, of great peril for the country of Ukraine and for the world. And I want to take this opportunity to express the solidarity of the people of my constituency of Cardiff West, in Wales's capital city, to the people of Kiev, the capital of Ukraine, and to the whole of the Ukrainian people. Actually, honourable members may not be aware, some will be, I know, that that one of the previous MPs for Cardiff West had strong Ukrainian ties. In what can only be described as a temporary historical blip, the voters of Cardiff West broke with decades-old habits and returned a Conservative MP in 1983. I'm afraid the experiment was not a success, Madam Deputy Speaker, and after 4 years they returned to Labour and have done so ever since, to my considerable benefit. But the name of the late Conservative MP for Cardiff West was, of course, Stefan Teleski, who was born in what is now Western Ukraine in 1927. Now, I should make it clear, his politics and mine could hardly have been more different, but his extraordinary life story, where he was both enslaved by the Nazis and conscripted into the Red Army, from which he absconded, is a reminder of the suffering the people of Ukraine have endured through war in their history. And when Ukraine became independent after the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, he warned of the dangers of maintaining overly close ties with Russia and pressed for Ukrainian membership of the European Union. And we now see his fears being realised right in front of our eyes. Other honourable members may not either be aware of the Welsh connection with Ukraine as we learn more about Ukrainian history, perhaps for the first time. For example, the city of Donetsk in the Ukraine owes its creation to a man from Merthyr Tydfil, Madam Deputy Speaker, called John Hughes, who towards the end of the 19th century left the Welsh valleys to start a new life in what was then one of Imperial Russia's industrial centres. In 1869, Hughes, along with dozens of others, embarked on a daunting journey of more than 2,000 miles, boarding 8 ships and heading eastwards, ultimately using the opportunity to set up a state-of-the-art steel and ironworks of his own in what is now Ukraine. He chose the Donbass region because of its rich mineral deposits. And as word reached the ears of skilled workers, engineers and managers back home, around the site gradually grew up a thriving town of expatriate Welsh people, which was christened Hughes-ovka at the time, or later Yusovka. It grew to a population of 50,000 by the turn of the 20th century, and although its Welsh influence would come to an end with the Soviet Revolution in 1917, after which it was renamed Stalino and later Donetsk. So today, Madam Deputy Speaker, even though there still remains one part of Donetsk known as Yusovka, we as Welsh MPs in the UK Parliament send a message across political parties of solidarity to the people of Ukraine. But Wales is the focus of our debate today, and I want to talk a little bit about Welsh leadership, because I think the last 2 years of the COVID pandemic has highlighted the issue of leadership and styles of leadership, and in my view has provided a case study in different types of leadership at a Wales and a UK level. There's still, there's no doubt, I think, that the people of Wales have been very glad to have had my friend and constituency colleague Mark Drakeford as First Minister during the last 2 years of COVID crisis. His very thoughtful, serious and empathetic approach has provided a contrast, in my view, to the shambolic, chaotic and irresponsible behaviour of the UK Prime Minister, whilst a bevy of drunken parties in breach of the government's own regulations were proceeding at the heart of the UK government in and around number 10 Downing Street itself. The First Minister of Wales, Madam Deputy Speaker, was devoting every ounce of his efforts and attention to protecting the Welsh people against the deadly virus, even taking the precaution of occupying a small separate building in his garden to avoid spreading the virus. And throughout, he was prepared to take difficult, potentially unpopular decisions for the good of the nation. In short, Madam Deputy Speaker, he was faithful to the facts, not a hostage to the headlines. And that was the approach, I'm afraid, that the UK Prime Minister, in his desperate desire to not upset the right-wing press, pursued. And we see further evidence of that compassionate leadership in Wales's response to the Ukraine crisis. As I mentioned earlier on, Madam Deputy Speaker, in intervention, the First Minister has made it clear that Wales is proud to be a nation of refuge and has set aside £4 million from the Welsh Government's own budget for financial and humanitarian aid to Ukraine. I still don't understand, Madam Deputy Speaker, why the UK Government was content until recently to provide passports and privileges to Putin's pals, but is still refusing to waive visas for Putin's Ukrainian victims in their desperate hour of need. Now, the quality, I think, of that Welsh leadership has been reflected in the polls. A recent poll in January in Wales of over 1,000 people aged 16 and over, they were asked about leadership during the pandemic and the different approaches that were taken in Wales and England, and they were asked which approach they preferred. And the people in Wales, of the people in Wales, 60% preferred the Welsh approach, 17% preferred the English approach, 10% didn't know, and 13% expressed neither opinion. And other polls actually have shown that voters, even voters in England, preferred the Welsh approach to the COVID crisis than the one that's been taken in England. So I think that style of leadership, we need to reflect on the whole issue of leadership and what it means. And I think Mark Drakeford has been an exemplary example of good political leadership. I also want to mention the excellent leadership of Wales's capital city, of Cardiff, by Council Leader Hugh Thomas and his other Welsh Labour colleagues. During the pandemic, they acted so that no one needed to go hungry, setting up an advice line coordinating with Cardiff Food Bank, delivering 13,271 food parcels. On refugees, Cardiff hosted one of the highest numbers of people seeking sanctuary per head of any local authority in the UK. 50% of all asylum seekers in Wales have been hosted in Cardiff in recent years, and the people of Cardiff have been generous in doing so. On the environment, Cardiff's been recognised by the Queen's Green Canopy, the UK-wide tree planting initiative for the Jubilee, as a champion city. And Cardiff Council's planted over 25,000 trees and started work to increase canopy cover to 25% of the city from 19%. And this year, 16,000 trees will be planted in a single planting season. On the issue of culture, post-COVID lockdown live and unlocked music gigs at Cardiff Castle last August, funded by the Council and Welsh Government and curated by grassroots venues and supporting performers who have struggled during the pandemic, were a huge success. And successful Purple Flag awards since 2019 for excellence in the nighttime economy have been given to Cardiff, as I say, since 2019. And £130 million of business support was distributed by the Council during the pandemic. And the Council also adopted a new street naming policy, which I particularly welcome, using Welsh language names by default, with an expert panel proposing names that reflect local history and historic place names. Cardiff Council is working towards parity in the number of English versus Welsh language street names across the city. So that kind of leadership, I think, needs to be praised, and I hope it will be added to at the forthcoming local elections in Wales in May by the candidates for Welsh Labour in my constituency, who I think will all make excellent councillors, including Jasmine Chowdhury, Stephen Cunner, Susan Elsmore in Canton, Leo Thompson, Kanea Singh and Carol Wild in Riverside, Peter Bradbury and Elaine Simmons in Kyra, Russell Goodway, Malika Carbu and Irene Humphreys in Ely, Laura Rochford and Peter Jenkins in Llandaff, in Rada, Helen Lloyd-Jones and Tyrone Davis, and in Penturk, John Yarrow, in Fairwater, Claudia Boys, Saleh Ahmed and Lorna Stabler. I believe great leadership requires clear vision, integrity and the ability to see around corners and a willingness to take on difficult decisions. And I think both the Welsh Government and Cardiff Council have shown that. I want to move on to one final point, Madam Deputy Speaker, and that is the impact of the pig-headedness of the Home Office post-Brexit on certain issues and their impact on the Welsh economy, and particularly in this case, Welsh tourism and tourism across the UK. And I refer in particular to school trips that are undertaken by children from member states of the European Union. I was formerly the chair of Cardiff Castle when I was a member of the local authority in Cardiff. It's a wonderful centrepiece of our capital city that was bequeathed to the city by the Marquis of Bute and the Bute family, and which is a major tourist attraction in Wales and in the city of Cardiff, and a big attraction for coach parties of school children from the continent of Europe, particularly from France, from Italy, from Germany, from other EU countries. Now, as a result of Brexit, the Home Office have decided that any child visiting the UK on a school trip has to have a full passport, whereas previously they need only have carried an identity card or some group identity passport was all that was required to participate in a school trip. As a result of this decision, operators are reported, it was reported in The Guardian at the end of last year, and it was, this evidence was confirmed by Bernard Donoghue, who is the Chief Executive of the Association of Local and Visitors Attractions, at the recent meeting of the Digital Culture, Media and Sport Select Committee. Some are reporting 80% of their customers, of some travel companies' customers, are now going elsewhere, rather than Wales or the rest of the UK as a result of this policy.
On that point,
I will give way, yes.
I remember for giving way. Could you reflect school children, Welsh school children, British school children, going into the Schengen area for the past couple of decades? Would they have got away with a driving licence, or would they have needed a passport to enter the European Union Schengen area?
The fact of the matter is that I took many school trips over, and they didn't require a passport in order to travel, because you can make group travel arrangements within the European Union. And I will give it, yeah.
Thank you. I'm grateful to my honourable friend for giving way. He's making some really important points on this. And the cultural differences around our country are also made great when we can travel to Europe as well. I had the great opportunity as a member of the National Youth Choir, Orchestra and Brass Band of Wales to be able to tour Europe as a child, and we're now seeing artists and musicians struggling to tour across Europe because of the visa issue as well, and I think that point desperately needs to be raised for our choirs, brass bands and orchestras.
Well, it's a point that she's raised and I've raised many times in this House, but I want to get to the nub of this here, because this policy is a choice, not a requirement by the Home Office. And it's a choice that is causing significant damage to British business, causing significant damage to our ability to attract these kinds of school trip tours to our country, and it's affecting our visitor attractions. And when the Home Office are asked why they're pursuing this particular policy, their answer that they've given to organisations like the Association of Local Visitor Attractions is, that's what people voted for. That's what they say. That's what people voted for in the Brexit referendum. Maybe they've got a point, Madam Deputy Speaker. I remember seeing that bus, on the side of it written, on the side of the bus, no more French school children coming to visit our country. Is that what people really voted for in the Brexit referendum? No more French school children absconding and taking our jobs. No 12-year-olds stealing British jobs. It's a ludicrous position, Madam Deputy Speaker, the Home Office have adopted, and they need to revisit it urgently. I will give way to the former Secretary of State.
I'm very grateful to the Honourable Gentleman for giving way, and he's making an important point that tourism, of course, is a vitally important industry in Wales, especially in North Wales, and not least in my own constituency. My tourism operator constituents are terrifically concerned about the prospects of a tourism tax in Wales, which the Welsh Government seems to think is a really good idea. Does the Honourable Gentleman think it's a good idea too?
Well, it's a great distraction technique to try and stop me when I was reaching my peroration, and it's absolutely irrelevant to the point that I'm making. But my view has always been, and I've made it absolutely clear, that I think local or those sorts of things should be decided locally, and people should have the option to decide how best to handle their tourism funding at a local level. That's always been my view, and I would have thought it's a view that might fit in with Conservative philosophy, possibly, rather than centralising everything in that way. But I return to the issue that I'm making about visitors to Wales, Madam Deputy Speaker, because as a result of it, as I've said, there's been a significant reduction. And this is going to have a huge impact if we don't have school children from Europe visiting. And I have to say, as a former teacher, if I had a class of school children, some of whom had a full passport, some of whom only had an identity card, I'd do the same as continental school teachers are doing now. I wouldn't bring my class, because I wouldn't deprive some in the class from an opportunity to visit in order to allow others to do so. And neither would any teacher worth their salt act in that way. Whenever we took a school trip, if someone couldn't afford the school trip, we made sure that somehow or other the funds were put together quietly and behind the scenes to allow that child to travel. This is a ludicrous example of Lord Frost's pig-headed Brexit dogma, and it should be stopped. The Home Office should reverse the policy so that children can come and visit Cardiff Castle again, and we can have the joy of seeing them on the streets of our capital city.
Simon Bowes.